Hey everybody, I'm the Drink Pro, and today we're reviewing the 15-year Balvenie Single Barrel. What's up everybody, Kyle the Drink Pro here with you yet again. Thank you all so much for liking this video, commenting with your thoughts, sharing it with your friends, and don't forget to click that subscribe button and the bell for notifications. Today I am reviewing the 15-year single barrel version of the Balvenie. Now I think I've reviewed Balvenie products in the past, although I don't remember. I've made so many of these videos, and it's because of you, by the way, so I appreciate you watching. But the Balvenie is actually one of my personal favorite whiskeys from the region of Speyside. Speyside is a region in Scotland that makes a lot of very good whiskey, and I've heard people say they sort of fall into two categories, and I kind of like that description. They have very sweet, rich whiskeys. People think of the Macallan for their sherried products, and they have some lighter, almost herbal, grassy whiskeys. The Glenlivet is a good example of that. And they have all kinds of things in between those two, like what I'm reviewing today, the Balvenie. Now, I do expect this one to fall a little bit closer to the sweet, rich side. I've heard this thing is just bursting with fruit. It is a beautiful whiskey if you just look at it, but you'll see it in a glass in a second. But I wanted to talk about process-wise, what makes this unique? Now, Maltmaster David Stewart MBE, that's member of the British Empire, first started making this product in 2014, where he decided to take a single run of distillate and age it for its entire 15-year life in a sherry butt, which is the barrel that a sherry ages in. And then once it spent those 15 years, they bottle that barrel individually. It is a single barrel product. And I think that's a fun way to kind of see the difference between barrels. If you get a couple of bottles of this that are from different runs, you will have different experiences. Now, no run is over 800 bottles, and part of that is because of the size limitations of sherry butts. If you've been watching my show for a while, you know that I have rather strong feelings about sherry and whiskey. A lot of whiskeys can be over sherried, so I do have some reservations about the sherry level in this whiskey, but we will find out how much it is. Now, shout out to my good friend Josh, who is over at the I Drink and I Know Things Whiskey podcast. He also has a Facebook group. Those guys are great. I highly recommend checking them out. He provided me with this sample, so thank you so much, Josh. And we are gonna dig into it without any further ado. Wow, so on the nose of this, it's actually surprising how muted the sherry is. I mean, I can tell it's a sherried whiskey, but it really smells more just like tons of candied fruit. And I love a fruity whiskey. Again, if you've watched my show, you know that I love fruity whiskeys. But I always have that difficulty because sherry can present fruit, but then it can also give me this very unpleasant, in the context of whiskey for me anyway, very unpleasant wine quality. I like wine, but I have to be in a wine mentality. So if I'm drinking whiskey, I don't think wine, I think whiskey. Now, you can kind of adjust those expectations, but for some reason I've always had a hard time doing it with sherry. Now, as this settles into the glass a little bit, I can still definitely smell this sweet grape component, which is definitely coming from the sherry. But one of the things I'm really not getting, that I often get from sherry finishes, is the sourness. Now, maybe that is because this is not a sherry finish. This is actually sherry aged. That distinction could really matter here. I get a definite honey note on the nose, and also maybe a sort of a light lemony or a citrus component. Honestly, for me, it's like tangerines. It's a little bit sharp, a little bit orange-like, but not as sweet or mellow in some cases as an orange. It's got that high, stingy sharpness, which I associate with tangerines. And it's not hyper sweet, which is what I assume, or not assume, that's what I associate clementines with. Malt grain is definitely not lost on the nose. You can smell the maltiness. It's sweet, it's grain-like. It's honestly something that I think a lot of bourbon drinkers don't like. They miss that super sharp sweetness of corn that becomes almost corn syrup-like. But there's a nice, sweet gentleness that comes with a malted whiskey that I think is often underappreciated in America. Lots of those classic dark fruits, which is very common with sherry. I'm getting plums, apricots, maybe some peaches as well. And one thing I'm picking up more of on this than I have on other pours is the baking spice. I don't usually get much baking spice on scotches, but for some reason it's showing up for me a lot on the nose here. Lots of brown sugar and cinnamon, maybe just a touch of clove. but really the fruit is the predominant note, and it is fruity in a way that reminds me a lot of more in the bourbon category for some reason. I've had bourbons that were especially fruity, that were very berry forward, and while this is more dark fruit than berries, I do feel like it's not nearly as sherry focused as a lot of sherries. Oh, making a mess. Let's taste it. Now, fair warning, if you're a bourbon drinker, this is definitely a Scotch. And by that I mean the malt is prominent. It is definitely grain forward. It's got a little bit of a slight bitterness, I guess I would say, that isn't associated with oak. I associate it with grain, but it's just something that you're not gonna be used to if you're not used to drinking malt whiskey. See, here's the problem though. On the mid-palate end of the finish, I'm getting this distinct bitterness. You know, the first taste, I got this sort of slight bitterness up front that I associate with grains, but second taste, it's really this back of the mouth, back of the palate bitterness that I associate with oak. It's not usually something I go for. It's also something I associate with a sherry finish. Now, front of the palate, it's definitely sweet. You get lots of almost like cherry syrup sugar. It's very nice, but that finish really doesn't do it for me. It leaves a lot of bitter, drying oak. Now, I'm wondering if that's not because this sample bottle was about half full and it's been sitting for quite some time. The initial sample that I took out of it when the bottle was full, I actually drank with Josh. I don't remember if it was on a podcast or on one of the videos he releases on his Facebook channel, but I do feel like it was a lot fruitier in that initial tasting and that bitterness was much more quieted. This is a very easy drinking oaky Scotch. It's 47.8% alcohol, which is relatively low for a lot of bourbon drinkers. It's pretty standard for Scotch. But because of that sherry, because of a lot of time in oak, you get a lot of that sweetness and a lot of that oakiness, but it's very gentle throughout. It's a smooth, easy drinker. And some people think smooth is a bad word in whiskey. I'm not sure that I do. It depends on what you're wanting to do with it. I do think that up front on this whiskey, there is a ton of sweetness and fruitiness. Getting, like I said before, cherries, but also maybe raspberries, a little bit of that apricot note that I was smelling is showing up in the taste. Unfortunately, and I think this speaks to how long it's been open, it's lost a lot of that sweetness. The characteristics that I remember making this so good in my initial tasting, probably about a year ago at least, were that super sweet, fruity note up front. And those have really died down as this has opened up and it's left me with this unpleasant, bitter, dry aftertaste. Now, I can't say I don't recommend this pour because of that, but here's what I will say. Do not leave this bottle sit. I know that a half full sample bottle over a year's time significantly degraded. So I would not let this bottle sit. If you're gonna buy one of these and you love what happens fresh out of the bottle, drink it fast. And there are some pours like that. Some pours just can't be left open. They lose so much of what makes them special. Some pours can sit for a while and retain a whole lot. So make sure that you know where your pour is and keep revisiting it. If it starts to degrade, put it on the front of the shelf and finish it now before it gets too bad. Don't let the bad apple theory happen to you where if you always put the bad apples on top so that you eat them right away, you only ever drink bad apples. Keep revisiting the other whiskeys that you don't know where they are in their life cycle. Don't only drink the whiskeys that you know need to be drank now. Sometimes it's worth getting rid of a bottle or drinking it and it not really being very good to make sure you visit the gems in your collection over and over again while they still hold all of that magic. And maybe that's advice that's only for a niche market for people that have hundreds of bottles of whiskey, but if you aren't drinking it regularly, it will start to deteriorate. It will be subtle. It will be subtle, but it will be noticeable. And when you spend as much time as I do sitting there and agonizing over the flavors in a whiskey, you'll notice it for sure. All right, guys, I gotta say I would recommend this, but don't let it sit for long. You guys keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.